stopped free water distribution. I thought the system that they had in place was not the most efficient system, so I had problems with this from the beginning. But the problem is once you start something and people get used to it, and they work to see if we could find a solution, either to reopening these pods or to providing water at the very least. We have to do it through volunteers, we will, but I think the state has a responsibility to help us with this still. Fortunately, when a crisis happens, there's a lot of attention, we appreciate that, but quite often, unfortunately, the policy that has to follow afterwards to make sure it doesn't happen again is lacking, and that's what's happening now.
This is Channel 5 News, and I'm Stephanie Campbell. Well, it's Friday, and we are going to take a special look back at Flint, Michigan, and its water crisis, and what has changed since. Most of us just assume that our water is safe to drink, but that is not the case for the residents of Flint, Michigan. And looking back today, it is hard to believe that it has been almost 4 years since the Flint water crisis in 2014. This has been an ongoing public health epidemic that has yet to be cured. Now, you may remember that the residents were exposed to high levels of lead after a state-appointed official switched the city's water source from Lake Huron, which was the third largest body of fresh water in the world, to the Flint River. Now, the big issue was when the river water was not properly treated with an anti-corrosive and damaged the outdated city pipes. That lead in the old pipes leached into the city's drinking water, poisoning thousands. Children were at the biggest risk. Lead exposure is extremely difficult to treat, and pediatrician Dr. Mona Atisha supports this claim. She actually helped expose this water crisis. It is something that we see years, if not decades, after exposure. But there is more than the lead in Flint's water. There appears to be a number of other diseases we may be hearing about. One major one including Legionnaire's disease, which is a severe form of pneumonia caused by the bacterium known as Legionella. The illness is contracted when a person consumes contaminated water. Epidemiologists, as well as infectious disease experts, reviewed 6 years of patients' health records and their assessment. They noticed a rise in pneumonia diagnosis among Flint residents during the water crisis. Now, this was a huge indicator that the exposure to contaminated water with Legionella bacteria was highly likely. An investigation was done by PBS Frontline that determined that 119 people have died from the disease, and there could be more deaths in the future. It took officials 15 months after the announcement to the crisis to notify communities of the Legionella outbreak. Things are being done, but it does not seem fast enough. State prosecutors are bringing involuntary manslaughter charges against Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Director Nick Lyon, and state officials and some city executives face criminal charges as well. Special Prosecutor Todd Flood was quoted as saying, "There was a clear willful and wanton disregard of knowing that someone was going to get sick, someone was going to die, and they sat on the information," and that being specifically Director Nick Lyon. Flint has launched an ambitious project to restore residents' faith in their water by swapping out lead pipelines for safer lines made of copper. The Flint water system has checked this summer, and it showed that there's a good presence of chlorine residual. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says chlorine residual is important because it shows both that sufficient chlorine was added initially to the water to inactivate bacteria and some viruses, and that water is protected from recontamination during storage. One of the top great public health achievements in recent history has been reducing childhood lead exposure. Over the past 50 years, the EPA has worked with federal and state partners to reduce and even try to eliminate the use of lead in gasoline, paint, pipes, food cans, and many other products. More recently, the EPA has cleaned up lead-contaminated waste sites and established standards for dealing with old lead-based paints. The public health and medical communities have worked together to increase awareness, identify those who are at risk, and provide blood lead testing for communities. Because of all these collective actions, the blood lead levels have declined by more than 90% since the mid-1970s. Now, these current events in Flint show us that more work needs to be done to keep our communities healthy and our children safe. That is it from us on Channel 5. Please stay tuned for Brad Force for your traffic report.